Hello, everybody. All right, so today I'm going to talk about politics again. I have been thinking out loud. I have been thinking out loud about so many things, and I don't seem to reach a conclusion, so I'm going to think out loud with you here. General question is, what is happening? Okay, President Trump and his policies. First question, overall question. Is there an aim, an overall strategy, an overall vision of what he wants to achieve? Is there a strategy to achieve that aim? And if so, is he on his way to achieving it, to achieving that aim, or not? Or is he, on the contrary, being in some sort of way curtailed, constrained, directly, indirectly, covertly, overtly, from his trying to achieve that aim? Alternatively, does he not have an overall aim, a sort of a cosmovision of where he wants to go, what he wants to achieve, an overall strategy? And he is concentrating mainly on individual things, on short-term tactics, to achieve small victories here and there, independent victories, let's say. Okay, so is he leading or is he being led? Overtly, covertly. I put it this way because I am confused. I hear one thing one day, another thing another day. Sometimes the things are contradictory to each other, and it is difficult, certainly for me, to figure out, to work out what his position is in the overall scheme of things. This is what I mean. An example. As I understood it, his position is that he said no to continuing the war in Ukraine, right? That seemed to be what he was aiming at. Okay, cutting a long explanation short, it would appear, therefore, that he was going against, if that is what he was trying to achieve, that he was certainly then going against the overall globalist trend that did not start but became, to all of us, apparent and obvious, really, for anyone who has eyes to see and ears to hear, let's say in the 1990s, this globalist trend. So it would appear that if he is trying to do that, that would be against that globalist trend. Okay. At the same time, however, he seems nevertheless to be very much for the continuation of the other conflict in the Middle East, which is very much, as I understand it, very much part and parcel, I would say, of that same globalist agenda. Okay, so one cannot be against and for an aimed overall strategy at the same time. you cannot be against a given overall strategy and for the same overall strategy at the same time. It makes no sense. You can have a goal, an aim, an overall strategy to achieve that aim, and of course differ on the tactical short-term actions to achieve that same aim, for sure. But you cannot be against and for one same aim at the same time. So what's happening here? I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of it. Let's parcel things out, just for me to understand it. If I can understand things a little bit more clearly. Let's separate, to begin with, two things that do not go separately. Indeed, they are part of the same strategy, but in order to best identify the individual parts, the parts that constitute one same whole, parts that nevertheless are of that same whole nevertheless. Am I making sense yet? I will. Okay, let's start with, I'm going to separate things out, okay? First, domestic policies, national policies first, okay? Let's leave aside, for the time being, international issues, foreign policy issues, okay, just the United States, just national domestic policies. Okay, so we put the foreign thing apart, concentrate on the country, on the domestic front. First, first question, is this administration better structured now than it was, say, in the first mandate in 2017? It would appear so, at first sight. I'm not saying that the people around him now are necessarily more able, more intelligent, better prepared for governing, more experience, etc., etc. I'm simply saying it would appear so because no one seems to be actively, directly working against him that we can see. I'm talking about the domestic front, okay, and as directly involved in, constraining him and changing everything, as was clearly the case in 2017. So it would appear so. But are they really? Are they all on the same boat, so to speak? The people close to him, around him, his advisors and so on. Not clear to me. Okay, let's talk about it. Many of them have no experience in their posts. He chose them, as he is entitled to do, because either they agreed with his vision entirely, or he was in some way persuaded to accept some of them as part of something else, as part of an agreed deal. Okay. For example, Marco Rubio was not in his camp before. Maybe others. Is he there in the same camp as President Trump now? Does he share his vision? How about the others? I found it very interesting talking about Marco Rubio, at the debacle. I'm going to go back to foreign policy, don't worry, I'm just interested at that debacle in the Oval Office. You remember, between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. And Marco Rubio was there, deadpan face, not reacting at all. I found it strange. To me, he was actually trying very hard not to react. It was strange, and I noticed it. Perhaps you did too. I don't know, because in an altercation, when two people are arguing, and you are watching your facial expressions react to what you are thinking. Oh my goodness, what is that? But your eyes, your facial expressions actually react in some way. But there he was like that. He was like that. Deadpan, looking ahead. It was a look. It was like a cow looking at a train going past it. Okay. Well, later we learned that perhaps he and perhaps others had talked to President Zelensky beforehand. Question marks about that. All right. Let's move on. We're still on domestic. We haven't even started on domestic policy. Okay. So, there is a new way of thinking now, a different ideological approach among elites. We have discussed this before, that the oligarchs, the elites are, I don't want to say fighting, but they're disagreeing amongst themselves. And there is a new, different ideological approach among these elites, these billionaires, these oligarchs. The new way of thinking, personified perhaps with Peter Thiel and Curtis Yarvin, perhaps Elon Musk, might not be the only ones. They're looking at politics in a different way. For them, there has to be a reboot of the whole system of how government operates. They're a sort of billionaire revolutionaries, as it were. Most of them in the big tech industry, technocrats. They are called the New Right, and they go by the acronym of NRX. All right. So for them, very generally speaking, the neoliberal order that we have been, let's say, since the 1990s, of course before, but has failed, has reached its limit, has reached its end. It's now a failed system and needs to be dismantled, and things need to be done in a completely different way. Does Donald Trump agree with them? Is their worldview accepted by him? Is he being influenced by them? I don't know. But it is there. What they believe. As I said, I don't know whether they're influencing him. I'm just saying that it would seem as if they are. Okay, this is what they believe. Democracy, as we have had it until now, has to be rebuilt because it's failed and it's destined to collapse. A country, they tell us, forget ideologies, although it could be argued that theirs is an ideology too, but for them a country has to be managed like a corporation. And like a corporation, it has to be run by a CEO or, at least a board. This is the only way to avoid all those pitfalls of democracy, inefficiency, corruption, all those things that are inherent perhaps in a democracy. That it is inefficient. That is the word, inefficient. So they are for efficiency. Great. Okay, we're all for efficiency. I'm for efficiency. You are for efficiency. What they propose is, however, very much in a hierarchical structure. Nothing new there either. I mean, even in the most democratic of countries, I mean, Marxists will tell you, you don't need to agree with them, but there has always been a ruling class, really, at the top, and then different layers, downwards, What changes here is that they want to change those who are at the top, not at the very top, not the financial world, all that, the ones really at the top, but the manager types. Okay, those need to be changed. Okay, so those at the top, the emperor, the king, the aristocracy, the nobles, the powerful, they were always the one who decided. With the advent now of democratic governments, more and more corporations. Yeah, that is what we've had. Okay. So they have a problem of how your country, this corporation, as they see it, is being run. So who then at the top now do they want to promote? Themselves. A technocratic ruling class, as it were, big tech. They are sort of, the new kind of robber barons or something. They want to be they are the new leaders, they claim, because this is the age of technology. The way we have run things before does no longer work. It has to be those who manage technology. The old liberal democracy, democratic order, no. They have a problem with the soft power having been exercised by academic institutions, the media, the state bureaucracies, even political parties. That, they say, is failed. It no longer works for this new age. They see that old world, as they see it, as a sort of a hierarchy. They call it an illiberal. It's like an illiberal cathedral, they say. One that imposes a new religion, a progressive dominance of thought that has been stifling any attempt to real transformation of the system. This old power, they claim, has to be dismantled or replaced by a new autocracy based on technocratic knowledge and mercantile principles. Okay, so they are anti-woke. Fine. And all that paraphernalia of thought brought on certainly since the 2010s. And they claim that no longer works. Well, that is true. It doesn't really, though it still lingers on here and there. But you can say people got just a little bit too tired of it. So they want to, as I claim in another video, they want to come back to common sense. Yes, but there was a reason for that whole thing, that woke thing. You remember BLM, what's a woman, but it didn't just appear. There was a reason for it having been introduced. A disruption of society by attacking its foundations, its mores, and so on and so on. Why would anyone want to do that in the first place? I mean, to disrupt society's cohesion, break it asunder. And that's as old as time, because they were involved in getting to a specific goal in their own interest. Let's say the banks. And in order to achieve it, you have to have the population, as we all know, looking somewhere else, fighting another battle, fighting against each other, concentrating their efforts on fighting each other, fighting one another. So Why? So that they don't fight you. Yeah, you in power. It's not that they themselves believe that woke nonsense. Of course they didn't. But they did encourage it, and they did force it there through the media for us to fight it out. Okay, so it did work for a few years. It's run its course now. So, okay, they are anti-woke, fine. But what they're not changing, however, is the hierarchical structure of how society should be organized, nor its autocratic bent. They simply seem to want to rearrange who manages at the top, who sits at the top, meaning perhaps even changing politicians by technocrats. Okay, but the ones at the real top are going to be the same. I mean, the masters are going to continue to be the masters. So, would the people who sit at the top really be changed? The answer is no. So basically, what we are left with is a different way for those who sit at the top, the managers, I mean, to continue governing more effectively, yes, more efficiently, yes, but not much change here as how the world is governed. Okay, so I agree with, there is so much more there, but in any case, the thing is that the main claim is that the way things have been working no longer work and you have to change it. Fine. What do you put instead? Technocracy, technology, people who know how, the technocrats. So I agree with many of the criticisms they point out, inefficiency, corruption, etc., etc. Of course, they have to put out there things that you and I and most people are going to agree with. Otherwise, you won't follow, we won't follow, but it is the same thing. I agree with some of their propositions, I agree with some of their criticisms, but not with the cure they propose, not necessarily with the alternative they offer. I agree with the diagnosis, I don't agree with the cure. Sometimes listening to them actually reminds me of Brave New World. Would you like society to live in a society? Okay, the one that we have corrupt, inefficient, yes, we have to change it, but would you like to live in a society terribly, terribly, terribly efficient, but inhuman to a large extent? Technology tells you what to do. I'm afraid that this, the problem I have with it is that it's leading us uncomfortably, to me anyway, this new way of thinking with so much power on technology, it leads me to this new thing about transhumanism, whatever it's called. Remember that they have to put it to us in a way that we can say yes to this change. No one is going to ask us, would you agree to live in a transhuman society where technology has power? No, of course not. They're not going to do that. So, but I have this uncomfortable feeling that if we start saying yes to all this, that they're going to lead us inevitably along this primrose path, as Professor Mearsheimer always says. One step at the time, and we won't even notice. I am all for efficiency, God knows, but not to the point where I have to exchange technology for natural law and give up my freedom as a human being. I talked about natural law not long ago. those immutable rights that we have because of the mere fact that we are human. The emphasis not being me, human, lord of the world, but rather in natural law, me, human, created in the image of God, therefore these rights and these duties. That is important, that distinction, because it leads to completely different views of life. And yes, natural law, because one thing that is most evident in this worldview, in this cosmovision of the world they propose, is precisely, and you notice it throughout when you listen to them, the absence of any talk, any regard for community, tradition, religion. It doesn't come up. The view is not an organic view of society, but a technocratic understanding of man. There is no connection there in their view of society, any connection to civilizational ties, to humanity, good, bad, imperfect, all that. Just efficiency. And it scares me so much, efficiency. I don't want it to get to the point where I'm beginning to dread the word. There is no community, no organic society, just a bunch of itemized units responding to the machine. Oh gosh, this is horrid. Very much a sort of a Silicon Valley thing, view of the world. These people, these new aristocrats, really, an aristocracy not based on nobility, but on specific know-how, specific technological knowledge, and the measure of their bank accounts to go with. I believe that they do suffer from an overexalted view of themselves, an overexalted self-esteem, way over the top, super, uber elitism. And I think they see themselves as such because they have been so successful in business and becoming billionaires and so on. So they take this measure of success, and they confuse it with wisdom or even merit. Of course, if you get to the top, you have done things right. That is why you are successful. But not everybody that does things right and gets to be as successful as they are. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that success and merit go together many times, but not always. They are not parallel roads, as it were. Always. Anyway, that's... Anyway, my overall question is President Trump being influenced by this new thinking? I don't know. Does he agree with it? I don't know. But you see, if you have one main goal, and there are people out there disagreeing with you, there are people out there disagreeing with President Trump's position in the Middle East, for example, and they are complaining and protesting and demonstrating against that goal or that objective or whatever it is that you're doing there. Sure, you'd much rather not have that, much rather not have people getting in the way, protesting. It stops you a little bit. It's inefficient. But, I rather welcome a bit of inefficiency from time to time. To answer John Stuart Mill's question posed in the 19th century, yes, I'd rather be a human being experiencing hurt and hunger and sometimes even whatever it might be. I'd rather be that than than just an unfeeling piece of machinery. His question was, would you rather be a human being unsatisfied or a pig perfectly well-fed, satisfied? I think I'll go for the former still. Anyway, so the general question on domestic policy, is he being influenced by this new crowd, the efficiency crowd, autocratic efficiency? Now, let's move on to foreign policies and geopolitics and so on. All right. End war in Ukraine. Okay. Withdrawal from Europe. Abandon NATO, or at least change NATO substantially. New relationship with Russia. Bring Russia back from the cold. Russia kind of all of a sudden sort of friendly, kind of, friendly with the US, not really an enemy anymore. Why? With what aim is discourse changed about Russia now? And how is Russia to respond to this new seductive, eyelash flattering gaze from the US? Could it be that he's kind of acknowledging that the whole Ukraine project was a mistake from the start? Or if not, that it is a mistake now and should be stopped somehow? That would require an acknowledgement that the United States or NATO lost, failed. And that is going to be difficult. You have to find ways about it, yeah? And it is difficult because if your culture does not admit of confession, then what you're going to use is projection instead. Well, you have to deal with your sins in some way. Either you acknowledge them or you don't, and then you blame someone else. It was all Russia's fault, unprovoked, all that. So, how is Russia to respond to these overtures now? Indeed, how is Russia responding? Okay, let's continue. More questions. I can't figure out what's happening because some decisions or the approaches taken seem to be contradictory. Contradictory, I mean, not in themselves, taking each one separately, but put together. If there is an overall aim, all parts have to combine, however different in themselves, towards one sole and same aim. It's the tactics that differ, as we know. For example, wanting to end the Ukraine conflict, but not wanting to end it in the Middle East is not contradictory in one way. It might be contradictory in another aim. If you have a whole world vision, then it would be contradictory. But if you don't, and you just look at things independently, then it is not. It is very possible to say, no, I don't agree with the conflict in Europe because of this and that, and it's time to stop it, and I don't want it anymore. And nevertheless, but yes, I agree with that conflict over there. That is not inconsistent. But that means that you don't have a general worldview of what is happening. Okay, so wanting to end the war in one place and not wanting to end it on the other may not necessarily have to be inconsistent if you don't have a general worldview. You can argue, yes, two different situations, nothing contradictory about that, if taken independently, one from the other. In the overall scheme of things, it is to the empire's benefit to end this one war, but it is also to the empire's benefit to continue with that other war. Right. So, taken independently of one another, they are not, as I said, inconsistent. But yes, they are inconsistent if taken as a worldview, as an overall strategy, as a means to reach an overall strategic end. So let's see. In the Eastern European conflict, all right, let's take things bit by bit. Bring back Russia into the US fold. Why? Remember that the old strategy was to mainly separate Russia from Europe. Russia and Europe together from the empire's point of view, the globalist empire's point of view, Russia and Europe together could mean, if Europe acted independently, Russia and Europe together could mean a challenge to the US. Europe would be acting together with the most powerful nuclear power in the world. So, separate. That would mean that Europe would continue being dependent on the US and Russia, with all the sanctions and taking them out of the world's SWIFT banking system, etc., 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 would necessarily break and would have nowhere to go. Okay, but that was the start. But that didn't happen. And Russia, by turning its back to the West and looking to the East, now has become not only a nuclear power, but is doing well, becoming quite a power in the world. Okay, so this tactic didn't work. Worse, it made Russia and China come together, which is what they always wanted to avoid anyway. So talk about shooting yourself in the foot. So it didn't work. More, Russia, for all intents and purposes, I think we can agree, won the war. So now what? It could be what Trump is thinking is, how about, I don't need to go there and say mea culpa, we did it all wrong. No. But how about, without saying we lost, without saying, without all that, how about instead of treating them like that awful enemy out there, we start sort of try to be more friendly towards one another. Why? How? Well, you see, we could have economic deals together, right? The rare earths things, for example. By the way, most of them are in Russian territory anyway. I know that Zelensky has been selling those rare earth minerals all over the place, to BlackRock, to the European Union, then to Britain, then to America. And the truth might very well be that he's been selling something to all and sundry, and there might not be very much there anyway, because apparently, I don't know, but apparently people tell us that most of them are in Russia, in Russian territory anyway. But that's another point. Let's leave that aside. Trump could be in the process of trying to seduce Russia. In other words, look, I'm just looking at it from a economic point of view for the benefit of my country, the United States, and this is what you could do. You have raw materials, right? Okay. Now, you see, we could work together in their development. We could be sort of partners, let's say, okay? You bring the stuff, we bring the know-how, we have a sort of a partnership there, and so on. And at the same time, this would have the additional benefit if he could persuade Russia to, why don't we work together? I know, but, there are some issues, really, we could work together, economic things and stuff. Well, of course, the Russians already have, but what's wrong with just trying one or two things together, Okay, so this could have the additional benefit of separating little by little, separating Russia from China. And that would be huge. That's important. If we were to become partners in this little thing and the other, slowly, of course, but let's start. And by doing this, Trump would be thinking tactically in terms of benefiting the US, the United States, ultimately, yeah? So you could say, if you are American, why not? Perhaps we overdid it a little bit with Russia. A new sort of economic, sort of power balancing act there could be happening. Okay, so, but Europe, what about what about Europe? Okay, do you remember that the United States convinced the European Union to go headlong against Russia? Yeah, they convinced them, even though ultimately it was against their own benefit. But they were convinced that we are all together here, even though it was for the United States continuing hegemony. But nevertheless, they did persuade the European Union that Russia was really bad, Russia was going to invade, we have to, okay, headlong against Russia. And they did. They did go 150% with the United States to their detriment. So what is Europe? Oh, but you can't just leave. They're saying to the United States, you can't just leave this thing. I mean, you got a thing here, and now you're doing a 180 and just leaving, and leaving us holding the bag here. Can't do that. Oh, yes, we can. Yes, we can. We started war, United States, against Russia. Yes, we convinced you, Europeans, to come along with us in that fight. But now we change our mind. We want to do a 180 here, or 200, what is the German person there, the 360, and go in a different direction, you see, Europeans. And Europe, well, let them sort it out. We started it, you finish it. Fine, okay. So you would think that Europe could have reacted like, oh, gee, I think we've been played here a little bit. But no, on the contrary. The way they're reacting is, we shall go on. Doesn't cross their mind. Oh, I think it does, by the way, but that would get us into a different hole. But just for the time being, doesn't seem to cross their minds that this war was also intended to decapitate them. It's a sort of a Stockholm syndrome, I think. But to the US, Europe was never a subject, it was always an object. Okay, so that's a little bit about Russia, why he might be trying to, talk to Putin, all that. Okay, now, what about NATO? Okay, NATO. Trump sees international organizations, it seems, as things that have been, all kinds of international organizations, as organizations, institutions that have been abusing or taking advantage of the US. I believe he believes this. He talks about it a lot. He keeps complaining about them. They haven't treated us well. China hasn't treated us well. The European Union doesn't treat us well at all. The NATO countries don't treat us well at all. He keeps saying that these international institutions have all been taking advantage of the United States. In the case of NATO, it is true they have been, the United States has been paying, between 70 and 75% of the total budget, etc., etc. Okay, so fine. He complains about that, how everybody else has been taking advantage of the United States. All right, he has a point, but half a point, actually, because he's looking just at numbers, at budgets. If you just look at numbers and budgets, yes, he has a point. If the United States pays 75% of NATO and all the other countries together 25%, he has a point. If you just look at the budget and the numbers, but there is more than numbers involved here. Yes, America pays for most of it, but in exchange, you have an empire which you built on Europe's backs. You have bases all over Europe and the rest of the world because Europe entered into an agreement with you. You have the bases here, which means that you are the boss, telling us, let's exaggerate, telling us what to do and what not to do, really. We relinquish our overall sovereignty to you. In exchange, you defend us in case of trouble. In exchange, we follow you. In exchange, in Europe, we in Europe do not necessarily pay in cash, but in kind. It is true that in cash, 3 or 4 generations in Europe have enjoyed relative prosperity, certainly not having to pay for the military. In many of our countries we have had, and it worked pretty well, free healthcare, free education, free this and free that. Certainly my generation. Yeah, but you see, not anymore. It's no longer working, and so we'll have to start looking at this agreement again. So President Trump is looking only in terms of who is paying cash, so to speak. Europe paid with its loss of sovereignty, becoming a subject. That's paying also in kind, so that the United States could do in Europe and therefore throughout the world follow their interests. But that is a point that he makes continuously. So I don't know whether someone is bringing, a different point for him to consider. So, since the others don't pay as much as he does, hey, we don't care about them, let them be. Sees them, therefore, as parasites, bleeding the US dry. Okay, so, well, the alternative is, two alternatives to summarize. Europe pays up, can't afford it, destroy European economy, which is already happening, but somehow Europe pays up and you continue to defend Europe. Or, no, we won't pay up 5%, 3%, we can't afford it, so, but then we won't defend you. Okay, well, then you take your bases out of here. There is more than cash here. What then? So, you have to continue doing what we tell you to do. In other words, pay up and shut up. In other words, pay Europe for the privilege to obey the United States. Okay, or then perhaps a European force or NATO being run by Europeans. That could be another alternative. Yes, the US, I think it's being considered that, not the whole shut up of close of NATO, but being run differently with the Europeans more of a say in it. The US would still be there, but not really so much, and so on. I don't know. But, okay, so let's recap, bring all this into a coherent whole, if I can. So, Trump is looking after the economic interests of the United States, hence trying to bring Russia along somehow. Okay, Europe, not important. NATO having to take care of all those countries, draining our budgets, better for the US to go along or to have less of a say in NATO. Europe, okay, the financiers control Europe, we know that. The actual politicians do what they are told by them. That's one way of looking at it. And financiers need wars to make money. It is as raw as that. War as a business model. And they need catastrophes all over the place. One war here, another war there. We finish this one, we start the other one. Okay. And Trump is now seen as destroying these global institutions that have so much to lose if something happens to them. They can't afford to let that happen. So, London, Paris, Brussels, Germany, the NGOs, the open societies, the intelligence services, etc., come to the rescue of Trump trying to destroy global institutions. So they have to continue with this war, even if Trump were to succeed with Russia, and that's a big if. But even if he were, this other globalist camp will say, no, we cannot allow this strategy to succeed. Wars must continue. Okay, so we saw London and Paris leading the rest of Europe in trying to say this conflict has to continue until an agreement that something that we agree with happens. So it has to continue. But I think that Macron is an idiot. I mean, I don't. But London is saying this too openly for my own satisfaction. It sort of raises questions in my mind. For London to go so openly against Washington is too open for me. I'm suggesting that things may not be what they appear to be. So openly saying no to Trump's strategy. But in any case, they are trying to convince the rest of Europe to continue on as before. And there's this question mark about they are just a little bit too open against, about this going against the United States. I'm not comfortable with that because the English English have always been known as the masters of deception. To see London now leading Europe I will concede that the city might not see eye to eye with Trump's vision. There have been many times when this has been so throughout history. And yet, they always found a way to whisper in America's ear or to create a situation in which the US is left with the only one reasonable choice for them to act, which is always according to these whisperings. But not always, but they have both known, London and Washington, how to play each other so that no one wins or loses 100% completely. So this thing about being so openly against it is something else going on here. And also when it comes to England and Europe, we know that they have never been friends. There is, you pretend to be friends one time with this country, another time with that other country. But England's policy, we all know, towards Europe has always been the same. Never to want to rule Europe, the one dominant power. No, England was a maritime power, Europe land power, but never ever. Their policy has always been that, never allow any European country, be that France or Germany or the Austro-Hungarian Empire or Russia or Spain or whoever, no one be allowed to be more powerful than they are. They were. To be powerful enough to be in a position to defeat them. Okay. Can we go back in history? I mean, never mind, the Crimean War, the First World War, the Second World War. Yes. There has always been a reason to go to war, you understand, of course. The other side is always doing evil things. We know that. But at the end of it all, at the end of World War II, well, we started World War II because of Germany's invasion of Poland, and then we ended up passing Poland over to the Soviet bloc. Okay. I'm saying that I have a small doubt, question mark, in my mind as to whether this coming together, working together, peacekeeping forces against Russia, London, Paris, oh, they're all so united. The France and the EU is that what in fact England is doing with Europe, leading Europe? Well, leading Europe, yes, but to where? England's stand is too open, visible for me. I'm not sure. My question is, England leading Europe for Europe's benefit? Against the United States? No. So what it has to be, obviously, is that London represents the old globalist world, and there are things that have to be done. Because the main thing is to not to make too many changes geopolitically and to keep things as they have been, as close as possible for the last 30 years. World governance by corporations and financiers. Well, anyway. So this apparent opening to Russia, bring Russia back into the fold kind of thing, separated from China. From Russia's point of view, have the Russians learned anything from China? Well, you see, there is. I was listening not long ago to a former KGB, not KGB, but intelligence services of some kind. He was too young to have been in the KGB. His name is Daniel Stulin, I believe. I was listening to him in some podcast. He was talking about all kinds of things, and I don't know whether he is didn't bother to figure out whether he was actually true or just a plant or whatever it might be, you know, all these games. But in any case, he said one thing that actually caught my attention, and I want to bring it to you. He was saying that China is not really that much of a friend to Russia. That is why I say that when he's putting this thing against China there, he could be working not necessarily in favor of Russia. But anyway, okay, so China is not really that much of a friend to Russia. China, in all its relationships with others, they have always been seen to be a sort of a parasitic friend. Parasitic meaning that is going to, yes, drink your blood, you know, eat at you from within. And he explained it in this way. Russia and China came together as friends or allies in order to survive. Yeah. Necessity compelled them to come together because of the United States stand. But he claimed China has really been taking a lot of maximum advantage out of this relationship. That is what he said. And he mentioned some, I'm not sure whether it was petrol, I'm not sure what energy he was talking about, but he said in some things, Russia has to sell things to China at a 90% discount in many things. Seems like a little bit too much, 90%, but that is what he was saying. So he claimed, are taking advantage of Russia, and they always do this. Now, I don't know. We would have to see whether Russia is also, doing what it can in terms of advantage out of this relationship. Russia has all the raw materials. China has not very many. China needs Russia. Russia needs China in order to sell. But if their market were to be extended, they wouldn't need China as much as perhaps China needs them. Just thinking out loud. But in any case, this is what he said that I found interesting. He said, you see, in the West, we see a relationship in business, for example, in terms of twos. In other words, me, okay, you're having a fight, there is you and your enemy, yeah? A fight, a discussion, whatever, is two, yeah? You and your enemy. Okay, he says, China never sees that, doesn't see it in this way. China always sees it in terms of three. You, your enemy, and your friend or ally. There are always three involved. So, for example, in the Cold War, there was the USA and the USSR enemies. They were sort of here. So they were the ones able to take advantage because the other two were fighting. This is their philosophy. When two are active, fighting, and one passive, staying outside the fight, that passive one is the one who wins. When there are two passives, I'll explain this. For example, two passives watching TV with a gallon of ice cream. There you are, okay, eating ice cream. And one active, working hard, doing this, doing that, okay? Two passives, one active, the one active wins. Okay? So, has Russia learned anything from China? Because Russia, if she was allowed to be seduced with all that comes with it, to actually a new rapprochement with the United States, yes, we know they're going to cheat, but anyway, taking all that into account, if she was to sort of turn a little bit, then she would be the passive one, and there would be two actives here, China and the United States. Did I explain that? Okay, so look, if you are fighting your friend, yeah, the one that's watching is the one who wins, the passive. If you are sitting in front of the television all day, the two of you, okay, it is the one that's working that wins. If Russia was to turn around a little bit, she would be the one doing the watching, and then the other two would be fighting. Anyway, enough of this. My question for all of this is, has Russia learned anything? Russia, I'm sure they have. They probably know how China works, and they certainly know very well how the United States works. So, the Ukraine war passed from being a regional war to a global war where the geopolitics of the world is being rearranged. Of what? The European Union is not ready, doesn't have the power, doesn't have anything to balance it in favor of the Ukraine. It has to depend on the US. Yes, they have many gestures, speeches, preaching, but no works there, no fragmentation. Yeah, they differ amongst themselves. But all of this is from looking at it from where we are standing in the West. The main question is certainly a main question is, what does Russia think? What's their overall strategy now? They know the West every so often may appear friendly, sing siren songs in their ear, but how eager are they now to be part of the West again? You would say that they have to be at least somewhat cautious. Yes, and cautious also towards China. So, I was going to now go on, and just leaving all those question marks here, I was going to go on to talk about the Middle East, therefore. Okay, the other conflict. In these strategic ways, all the questions that I have, but I think I have to leave it for another time, because otherwise it's going to be too long. Anyway, more on this. Questions about President Trump's overall strategy, if he has one. Thank you so much for listening, and please share and like and do all those nice things for me. Okay? Thank you so much. Bye-bye.